They built the warships and fighter planes of Imperial Japan. They were the engines of a war machine that stretched across Asia. Their names were spoken with a mix of awe and fear, symbols of a nation's industrial might and its imperial ambition. By 1945, they were marked for death, targeted for complete annihilation by the victorious Allied powers. Today, their names are on your car, your air conditioner, your camera, and your bank. Mitsubishi, Mitsui, Sumitomo. This is the secret story of how Japan's powerful war corporations were destroyed after World War II, only to be reborn as the global titans that shape our world today. It's a story that feels almost impossible. How did companies that were systematically broken apart, their leaders purged and their wealth confiscated, rise from the ashes of total defeat? How did they transform from family-controlled military-industrial complexes into publicly traded, globally respected corporations? This isn't just an economics lesson. It's a story about power, reinvention, and the ghost in the machine of modern capitalism. It reveals that when a structure is powerful enough, it doesn't just die, it evolves. To understand the rebirth, you first have to grasp the sheer scale of what came before. We're talking about the Zaibatsu. The word means financial clique, but that term is ridiculously mild. These weren't just companies. They were sprawling, family-controlled economic empires, each a kingdom unto itself. The most famous, the Big Four, were Mitsubishi, Mitsui, Sumitomo, and Yasuda. Long before the World War II, these four groups alone controlled a staggering portion of Japan's economy, by some estimates, over 30% of its mining, chemical, and metals industries. Their power was built like a pyramid. At the very top sat a single dynastic family, like the Kawasaki family of Mitsubishi or the Mitsui family. This family owned a central holding company, the pyramid's capstone. This holding company controlled the group's crown jewels, a powerhouse bank, and a massive trading company. The bank was the heart, pumping capital, the lifeblood of industry throughout the empire. Beneath them, a complex web of subsidiaries stretched across every sector imaginable. Mining, shipbuilding, steel, chemicals, insurance, you name it. It was vertical integration on a scale the world had rarely seen. A Zaibatsu could mine its own iron ore, ship it on its own boats, turn it into steel in its own mills, build that steel into a warship at its own shipyard, insure it with its own insurance firm, and finance the whole thing with its own bank. Their origins are tangled up with Japan's frantic push to modernize. Some, like Sumitomo and Mitsui, trace their merchant roots back centuries to the age of the samurai. Others, like Mitsubishi, were born from the Meiji Restoration in 1868, when Japan threw off feudalism to rapidly catch up with the West. The government, in a hurry to build a modern nation, sold off state-owned businesses, mines, factories, shipyards, at bargain prices to loyal and ambitious families. The Zaibatsu became the chosen instruments of state-guided capitalism. This partnership between the state and industry hardened into a military-industrial complex as Japan's imperial ambitions grew. The Zaibatsu weren't just contractors for the military, they were intimate partners in conquest. They nurtured deep connections with government officials and military leaders, shaping national policy to serve their shared goals of grabbing resources and territory. When the war in the Pacific finally erupted, the Zaibatsu were ready. Their contribution was total. Mitsubishi, which began as a shipping firm, became a top producer of warships and military aircraft, including the legendary A-6M Zero fighter. Mitsui ran munitions factories and chemical plants. Sumitomo supplied essential metals and machinery. Their wealth and power exploded. But this boom was built on a dark foundation. To feed the military's insatiable appetite, the Zaibatsu's factories and mines were staffed with forced labor, including Allied prisoners of war and conscripted workers from across occupied Asia who toiled in brutal conditions. By 1945, the Zaibatsu were inseparable from the Japanese war machine. They were its architects, its engineers, and its main beneficiaries. And when Japan fell, they were square in the crosshairs of the victors. As the Allies saw it, the problem was clear. To build a new, democratic, and peaceful Japan, the old empires of money and steel had to be utterly demolished. In August 1945, Japan surrendered. The nation was in ruins. Into this vacuum stepped the Allied powers, led by the United States and the Supreme Commander in Japan, General Douglas MacArthur. His administration was formally known as the Supreme Command for the Allied Powers, or SCAP. Its mission, demilitarization and democratization. MacArthur and his advisors believed Japan's aggressive militarism wasn't just the fault of its generals, but was baked into its economic structure. They saw the Zaibatsu as a pillar of the authoritarian state, a concentration of economic power that choked competition, promoted anti-democratic values, and eagerly bankrolled imperial expansion. To reform Japan, you had to break the Zaibatsu, and so began one of the most radical trust-busting campaigns in history. The process was systematic, almost surgical. First, SCAP went for the head. The top holding companies were ordered to be dissolved. 16 major Zaibatsu, including the Big Four, were targeted for complete dissolution. These holding companies were forced to hand over all their stocks and assets to a special commission. Second, they cut off the family control that had been the defining feature for generations. The founding families, the Mitsuis, the Kawasakis, the Sumitomos, had their personal assets seized. Their vast stock holdings, the very source of their power, were confiscated. This wasn't just punishment, it was about fundamentally rewiring the Japanese economy. Third, and this is the crucial part, SCAP launched a massive redistribution of corporate wealth. The confiscated shares weren't nationalized. Instead, they were sold off, piece by piece, to the Japanese public. For the first time ever, regular citizens, employees, managers, small-time investors, could own a piece of the giant industrial firms that had once been the exclusive property of a handful of dynasties. This move created a whole new class of Japanese shareholders, planting the seeds of a totally different kind of capitalism. Finally, to make sure the old networks couldn't just reconnect, SCAP banned the practices that held them together. Interlocking directorships, where executives from one company sat on the boards of others in the group, were outlawed. Even using the old Zaibatsu trade names and logos was prohibited. On paper, the execution was a success. By the late 1940s, the great Zaibatsu were legally dead. Their family heads were purged from public life, their central holding companies liquidated, and their wealth scattered. The pyramids of power had been flattened. Japan's economic landscape, once dominated by a few towering peaks, was now, in theory, a level playing field. But a structure built over decades, with roots stretching back centuries, doesn't just vanish. You can cut the head off a hydra, but the body remains. The individual companies, the banks, the manufacturers, the trading firms all survived. They still had their factories, their engineers, and decades of institutional knowledge. And most importantly, they still had their relationships. The formal ties were gone, but the informal networks of trust and loyalty, forged over a shared history, remained. The stage was set not for an ending, but for a secret reinvention. We're at the turning point of the story, where a defeated system starts to secretly rebuild itself into something new, something that would eventually conquer the global economy. How this happened is the part of the story you've probably never heard. If you're finding this hidden history as fascinating as I do, and want to support more deep dives like this, do us a huge favor and hit that subscribe button. It really makes a difference and lets us keep digging. The dissolution of the Zaibatsu left a power vacuum, but nature and capitalism hates a vacuum. As the American occupation authorities were busy dismantling the old structures, the individual companies, now legally independent, started to drift back towards each other. They began to regroup not in the old top-down, family-controlled pyramid, but in a new, more subtle, and ultimately more resilient formation, the Keiretsu. Keiretsu, meaning lineage or grouping, is basically the ghost of the Zaibatsu. It looked different, it operated differently, but it carried the same DNA. The key difference: the all-powerful family and their holding company were gone. Power was no longer absolute and centralized. Instead, it became collaborative and decentralized, wielded by a council of professional managers, the presidents of the group's core companies. The pyramid was replaced by a circular web. But how did this web hold itself together? through a trio of clever informal mechanisms. First was the main bank system. The old Zaibatsu Bank, now an independent company, became the gravitational center of the new group. Banks like Sumitomo Bank, Mitsubishi Bank, and Fuji Bank, the successor to Yasuda, became the primary lenders and financial nerve centers for their former sister companies. They provided stable, long-term capital, shielding the companies from the whims of the stock market. The second and most critical mechanism was cross-shareholding. The companies in a group started buying small amounts of each other's stock. Mitsubishi Corporation might own 5% of Mitsubishi Bank, which owned 5% of Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, which in turn owned 5% of Mitsubishi Corporation. Multiply that across dozens of companies, and you get a dense, interlocking web of ownership. No single company had control, but the group as a whole was bound together. This system was a powerful defense, making hostile takeovers by outsiders nearly impossible. It meant management could focus on long-term strategy, not short-term shareholder demands. The third mechanism was the President's Council, or shachokai. This was an informal but incredibly powerful club. The CEOs of a group's core companies, for instance, the Mitsubishi Group's famous Friday conference, would meet regularly, maybe once a month, for lunch. There they'd share information, coordinate strategy, and solve group-wide problems. No legally binding decisions were made, but the consensus reached in those rooms would guide an entire industrial ecosystem. Then you had the Sogo Shosha, or General Trading Company, like Mitsui & Co., or Mitsubishi Corporation. These firms were the group's global eyes and ears, sourcing raw materials, gathering market intelligence, and finding new export markets for the group's products. This quiet reformation got a massive, unexpected boost from geopolitics. In 1949, communist forces won in China, and in 1950, the Korean War broke out. Suddenly, Washington's main goal in Japan wasn't punishment anymore. It was turning Japan into a stable, prosperous, capitalist fortress against communism in Asia. This strategic U-turn became known as the reverse course. SCAP's trust-busting passion cooled off fast. The economic rehabilitation of Japan became priority number one. American officials who once saw industrial concentration as a threat now saw it as a tool for rapid recovery. They started looking the other way as the old Zaibatsu companies quietly re-established their ties. The urgent need for a strong Japan in the Cold War gave the emerging Keiretsu the political cover and economic breathing room they needed to grow. The ghost in the machine had found a powerful new purpose. The Keiretsu structure, born from the ashes of the Zaibatsu and supercharged by the Cold War, became the engine of one of the most stunning economic expansions in history, the post-war Japanese economic miracle. From the 1950s through the early 1970s, Japan's economy grew at a blistering pace, often hitting an average annual growth rate of nearly 10%. By 1965, Japan's GDP was just over 90 billion. By 1980, it had exploded to over 1 trillion. The country went from war-torn to the world's third-largest economy in a single generation. The Keiretsu system was perfectly designed to fuel this meteoric rise, giving Japanese companies a set of competitive advantages that Western firms just couldn't match. The first was the idea of patient capital. Thanks to the main bank system and cross-shareholdings, Japanese companies were insulated from the pressure to deliver short-term profits for a fickle stock market. A CEO could pour money into huge long-term bets, building state-of-the-art factories, perfecting quality control, funding moonshot R&D, knowing their main bank and group partners had their back. This long-term focus was a game changer. Second, the Keiretsu offered incredible synergy and risk sharing. A group could take on massive industrial projects that no single company would dare attempt. Think about building a world-class auto industry from scratch. Within a group like Mitsubishi, the trading company could secure iron and rubber from around the world. The steel company could develop new lightweight alloys. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries could lend its expertise in engines and manufacturing. Mitsubishi Electric could develop the car's electronics. And Mitsubishi Bank would finance the entire decade-long venture. If one part of the chain struggled, the rest of the group was there to prop it up. This model was obvious in horizontal keiretsu like Mitsui and Sumitomo, which sprawled across industries. But it also worked in vertical keiretsu, where a giant manufacturer like Toyota sat at the top of a pyramid of loyal suppliers. Toyota's legendary just-in-time production system only worked because of the deep, trusting relationships it had with its network of keiretsu-style suppliers. The results of this system soon flooded the global market. In the 1950s, made in Japan was often a punchline for cheap, flimsy copies. By the 1970s and 80s, it had become a stamp of world-beating quality. Japanese cars from Toyota and Nissan were more reliable and fuel-efficient. Japanese electronics from Sony and Panasonic were more advanced and desirable. The descendants of the old Zaibatsu were leading the charge. The Mitsubishi Group, now a loose consortium of independent companies, was a global force in everything from cars with Mitsubishi Motors to global finance with MUFG Bank. The Sumitomo Mitsui Financial Group became one of the largest banks in the world. Names once synonymous with war machines became household names, synonymous with the products that defined modern life. The transformation was complete. The wartime conglomerates, dismantled and left for dead, had reinvented themselves as the new shareholders of the global economy. The journey from samurai-era merchants to wartime industrialists, from the ashes of defeat to global corporate titans, is a testament to the incredible resilience of these institutions. The story of the Zaibatsu isn't about simple destruction and replacement. It's a story of evolution. The Allied occupation did succeed in its main goal. It shattered the absolute dynastic family control that had defined the Zaibatsu. It broke the rigid pyramid of power, and by selling shares to the public, introduced the idea of shareholder ownership to Japan. But power, like energy, is never really destroyed. It just changes form. The centralized, family-run empires were replaced by decentralized, manager-run networks. The formal, legal control of the holding company was replaced by the informal, but no less powerful bonds of the main bank, cross-shareholding, and the president's councils. The Zaibatsu died, but their spirit, the ghost in the machine, was reborn as the keiretsu. This new form proved even better suited to the post-war world, becoming the engine that drove Japan's economic miracle. Today, that keiretsu system is evolving again. The cross-shareholding that defined it for decades is slowly unwinding in the face of globalization and demands for more transparency. Yet the legacy endures. The great corporate groups, Mitsubishi, Mitsui, Sumitomo, remain colossal forces in the world economy. Their member companies still collaborating, their influence still immense. The story of the Zaibatsu is a powerful lesson that the most dominant structures in our world are rarely what they seem on an org chart. It shows how networks of relationships, trust, and shared history can survive even the most radical reforms. And it leaves us with one last question. In our own modern economy, what powerful old structures are hiding in plain sight, quietly adapting, and just waiting for their moment to be reborn? If you want to explore another incredible story of economic transformation, check out our video right here on the screen about the Rothschilds of the East. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.